Hey everyone, today I'm going to be doing my first impressions on the level 100 Monk. As with all of the other videos, I'll first talk about some of the changes that happened to Monk. This is a class that got a little rework going into Dawntrail as well, so I'll go over all of the pre-90 changes and then go over the new skills and then just kind of give my thoughts on the class itself. Now when it comes down to Monk, this is the class that I was probably looking forward to the most going into Dawntrail, because I've always been a fan of Monk. I quite liked the new iteration of Monk that we got in Endwalker, kind of going away from the positional GCD focused job that we had before with our 6 positionals to a different identity playing around the Masterful Blitz system instead. And I quite enjoyed that system, but it still felt a little bit clunky to play sometimes with the buff and debuff management that the job did have. And going into Dawntrail, those things seemed to have changed, so I was very interested in leveling up my Monk, which is why it was basically the first one that I leveled outside of the new jobs, because of course that's new toys to play around with, and then also the jobs that I needed to go into Savage for my raid team. So let's talk about the old changes first. The first thing is that our Beast Chakra gauge has now been upgraded. So instead of just keeping track of your Beast Chakras, we now also have our new element added to this gauge, which is going to be replacing the buff and debuff management that we had before. So with Old Monk, Dragon Kick, Twin Snakes and Demolish would give us 2 buffs and a debuff that we had to keep track of. Now, instead of giving us the buffs and the debuff, we are instead going to be filling our job gauge orbs. We have 3 orbs over here. We have 1 for the Oppo Oppo stance, we have 1 for Coeurl and 1 for Raptor. We have 1 orb, 2 orbs and then 3 orbs in that order. Using the buffing skills, we'll fill this gauge, and then the skills that you would normally use when the buffs and the debuffs were applied are going to be subtracting from this gauge instead. So instead of having to keep track of your buffs and your debuffs, you're now just going to look at your job UI, and if you see that you don't have an orb for the stance that you're in, you'll use the orb gaining skill, and if you do see that you have an orb, you're going to be using the orb spending skill instead. So if I were to quickly go over Dragon Kick and Bootshine, Dragon Kick used to give you a buff that would buff your next Bootshine, so you would alternate these two. Right now, Dragon Kick is going to give you an orb on your job gauge, and Bootshine is going to consume the orb on the job gauge, and that goes for the other 4 skills as well. So it's really easy to just keep track of what skills you need to be pressing by just very quickly glancing over to your job UI, which I think is a very nice change, because that's probably like my biggest complaint about Endwalker Monk, especially for people where the rotation wasn't ingrained in your hands just yet, that it was sometimes difficult to keep track of which buffs you just had applied to yourself, and if you should use a True Strike or do I need to use my Bootshine and such. So this new system is really going to help with keeping track of all of that, which I personally am a very big fan of. Then Meditation also got some changes. This is mostly just going to be a new button that you have to put in your hotbar. In terms of hotbar space, there's not going to be extra buttons added or buttons going away, but it just works a little bit differently now behind the scenes. So honestly, just replace your old Meditate button with the new one, and functionally for you, nothing is going to be changing here. So just put it on the hotbar and that's it. Then we have Brotherhood, and this is another very big change, mostly quality of life, where whenever the buff is applied, you can now stack up to 10 chakras instead of 5, which is very big, because during your burst you were going to be fed chakras from your team like crazy, and you would often just overcap and lose out on chakras. Now going all the way up to 10 is going to mean that you can just spend these chakras as you get them a whole lot easier without overcapping on them as much as you did before. If you're late on using a Forbidden Chakra, it is still totally possible to overcap, of course, but at least the chances that you will overcap are much lower now. Then we have Six-Sided Star. This got a small change as well, where whenever you use it, you will gain an increase in potency depending on how many chakras you still have left. So whenever you go into downtime, you'll really want to be spending Six-Sided Star, that's like your last GCD, before you go into the downtime, because it just means that you do a lot of potency, you spend all of your chakras, and then during the downtime, you can then start building up chakras again. So I feel like that's kind of what they want you to do with that. I don't really think there's going to be any memes where you want like your last hit in Brotherhood to be a Six-Sided Star with 10 chakras active or something like that. People will probably be doing testing for that at some point, but I personally hope that that is not going to be the case. But only time will tell. And then last but not least, we have Riddle of Earth. This got Earth's Reply added to it yet again. Like, I feel like that button has changed so many times over the years. But essentially, Riddle of Earth gives you a defensive buff so that you're more tanky when a raid wipe happens, and then when you get hit, it regenerates your HP. But the button will change into Earth's Reply, which will give you a team-wide heal. And if you just use it at base, it is a weaker heal. If you use it after you get hit by an ability, it's a slightly stronger heal. So it's just nice if your second wind is on cooldown or something like that. But for example, there are a lot of multi-hit instances of raid wipes now, so you can just use it on a raid wipe and then kind of like help out your healers and your own survivability in the process. So quite nice. Then let's move on to the new toys that we got to play around with. Not a whole lot of them, to be honest, but still a couple of things that do actually affect your rotation. We have a new combo for our chakra spenders, so our Boot Shine, True Strike and Snap Punch are going to be upgraded into newer versions. They have a different animation, better potency. When it comes down to the new animations, the ones for Boot Shine and True Strike I like, but the new animation for Snap Punch looks a bit off. Like, it looks cool that you have like the whole tiger coming out, but the movement that your character itself does just feels kind of stiff and awkward. Not really quite sure how to put it into words, but when I look at it, it just doesn't really look right, I guess would be the best way to describe it. In the middle of a fight, not really something that I noticed, but when I was just like hitting a dummy looking at the new skills, it just felt kind of off. But of course, that is just personal preference right there. The other two skills, I do quite like how they look like. We also got a new Elixir field upgrade. It's called Elixir Burst. Outside of being a new animation, it is also a higher potency, and the higher potency means that it now actually lines up with the potency of Rising Phoenix, which will have an effect on our rotation, because previously using double Phoenix in the opener was something that you could do to get Phantom Rush underneath your raid buffs. Right now doing double Elixir Burst is going to be better, because to get to Elixir Burst we're alternating Boot Shine and Dragon Kick, which is going to be a higher potency, than getting to your Rising Phoenix. So if you liked the double Phoenix opener, now you're most likely going to be changing to the double Elixir Burst opener instead, as that just allows for the usage of more Oppo GCDs, and Crit the Boot Shine is still very much so Monk's identity. This expansion even more so when I talk about Riddle of Fire in just a bit. So Elixir Burst in the opener is now going to be stronger. Of course, if you want to do the basic opener where you alternate Elixir Burst and Rising Phoenix in the opener, that is also still something that you can do, of course. And then we still have two new changes. Both Riddle of Wind and Riddle of Fire are going to get a GCD attached to them when you use these skills, called Wind's Reply and Fire's Reply. For the most part, they kind of function the same, but there are small differences for them. So when it comes down to Wind's Reply, you only have 15 seconds to use this one. It has range on it, so it's our very first GCD that has range on it, and it deals AoE in a line in front of you. When it comes down to Fire's Reply, it has longer range, it deals damage in an AoE around the target, so you need to have a target for this one and then it splashes off that target. It has longer range, longer duration before you have to use it, and this will also give you Formless Fist. So Fire's Reply will have an effect on how we approach our burst window as well. So when it comes down to Monk, as I mentioned before, Crit the Boot Shine is still a very strong thing to do. So we want to prioritize our Oppo GCDs, because that is where we are getting our Boot Shine GCD in as well, to get as many of those GCDs as possible. So every time we get Formless Fist, we want to try and prioritize that on an Oppo GCD. So when we approach our bursts, ideally you want to go into a burst with an Oppo GCD, then use your Perfect Balance to do more Oppo GCDs. After you send your Masterful Blitz, start the next rotation with an Oppo GCD again as well. And then Fire's Reply kind of comes in there as well. So you do your Oppo GCD, Perfect Balance, you do whichever you need to do in there. You end Masterful Blitz with an Oppo GCD, send the Fire's Reply, do an Oppo GCD again as well. So it really changes how you execute the burst, and it makes the 1 minute burst also just a little bit more interesting than it used to be before. Now, Riddle of Wind still has an awkward cooldown of 90 seconds, which means that you only get it during the opener and then at 6 minutes, and then on the 3 minute mark it aligns with the 1 minute burst of Riddle of Fire again. But it still feels a bit awkward, like why didn't they just make this 2 minutes or something so it actually lines up. But I personally don't really mind it too much. If anything, it gives a little bit more wiggle room on where you want to use like a ranged GCD, which I actually kind of like how Monk has a ranged GCD now, but it is on a very long cooldown. Like we have the 1 minute of fire supply and we kind of want to use that in a specific part of our rotation anyways. And then wind supply, you only have a 15-second window to use it. So if it were to line up with a disengaged scenario, it feels really good. But if it doesn't, then it's just like another GCD that you have to press, I guess. But when it comes down to it, I really like our new Monk. The new job UI really made me feel a lot better about playing Monks. I'm not always glued to like my buff bar to see if I have my Dragon Kick buff, do I have my Twin Snakes buff. Now I just quickly glance at my job UI and I can see what I need to do. The Brotherhood change feels really good when it comes down to your burst, so you don't feel like you're overcapping your meditate stacks as much. The new Riddle of Fire, Riddle of Wind feels kind of good to use as well. It just kind of feels weighty as well, like the animations for these I do really like. And then of course, like I don't really mind how we kind of went from the positional GCD focused job to the Masterful Blitz focused job instead. I feel right now the current Monk plays really good. And I would not be surprised if this ends up being my favorite melee going into this expansion. It was the one I was the most excited for when we saw the previews, and even though we didn't really get a whole lot of new stuff, the quality of life changes that we got, the new job UI that we interact with, and then how fire supply ends up kind of changing the way how we approach our burst, make this job very fun to play right now. So if you haven't played Monk in a while, definitely give it a try. Feels really fun to play. Definitely something I can recommend to basically anyone that enjoys playing melee, because it just feels really good to play right now. And yeah, that's kind of everything I wanted to say. So let me know down below if you've already leveled your Monk. What do you think of the new system? Do you like how we went from buffs, debuffs to a job UI instead? And what do you think about our new replies as well when it comes down to wind reply and fire's reply? Do you enjoy playing around with them, or do you not like what they add to the rotation? Let me know down below. And with that, I want to thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.